Hi everyone, welcome to Simplify Consultants podcast, where we'll be discussing what we can do to support gender equality within the wealth industry. My name's Kirsten Brooks, I'm Business Support Manager, and I'm joined by some members of our team today. So we've got Matt Shaw, our Business Manager, and consultants Chris Lamb, Mike Penny, and Tom Cassidy. So to kick things off, the UN set a goal on focusing on achieving gender equality and empowering women by 2030. Which I think we can agree with only 8 years to go. It feels like we've still got quite a bit of work to do in this space. And following on from our recent white paper that we published last year, we just highlighted the challenges that are faced by women at the moment. So I'd love to hear what you think can be done to reduce gender disparity.
Yeah, thanks, Kirst. I think from my perspective, I'd say to start with, it's about raising awareness. I think personally, from reading the simplified white paper that you referenced, watching the podcast that we did last year, and personally some of the research that I did for my blog recently, I just thought it was really surprising. I think many of the issues highlighted that women suffer from hadn't even occurred to me, but clearly is an issue for lots of women. And I think the other bit that was even more surprising from Kirsch, you went into some of the local schools, didn't you? And you were talking to some of the kids, and even they were referencing or citing some of the biases through their family and parents and some of their experiences. I think the main thing that I was aware of previously was the gender pay gap, and that's mainly because of the media attention that it's had in recent years. So I think awareness is probably a good place to start, but then you need to do the hard bit, which is driving and supporting overcoming some of those issues, and that takes kind of commitment and support from everyone, but especially at a senior level within the business.
Thanks, Matt. Anything else? Anybody else got anything to add with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I think it's important to check your own biases. I think we all carry biases that are based on gender throughout our lives. We receive daily messages about what's expected of males versus females. I think they become ingrained and it's impossible to completely get rid of them. But we need to be more aware of our own biases. I think by doing that, we have a better chance of counteracting them. And practicing counteracting the stereotypes as well. So starting with day-to-day general observations. I don't know, as an example, if you see a fire engine go down the road, many would assume it's firemen in there. Or if you say the postman's here, and when actually it should be there's firefighters, or just say the post is here instead. So it could be very minor tweaks that we could all look to make. And really around awareness in young children as well. I think they have a habit of picking up traits from adults, so it's important that we start to normalize gender neutral phrases. As I suppose you never really want to discourage them from any of their ambitions to be, whether it's a police officer or something like that, by using the term policeman, that type of thing.
Yeah, it was really interesting when we were in the school, actually, because I thought we would have moved on a little bit more from how it was in the old days where nurses were women and, it was policemen. But we were talking to 14-year-olds and they were still very much in the women were hairdressers and the men were policemen. And so it's going to take a long time to break those habits, isn't it? So what do we think that we can do to reduce the gender gap in the workplace? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think it's important to acknowledge, like you were just saying, Kirsten, though there's been a shift in traditional gender roles in the past few years, there's still an expectation in society for women to take on responsibilities such as caring for children or if family members are to become sick. So there's evidence there, and as was looked in the white paper as well that we conducted, that it impacts both the employer's perception of the value of female employees wrongly, but also the decisions made by women as well to leave their current roles and or not pursue roles that could be difficult to accommodate around their lifestyles.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, that's really interesting because I think there's a lot of companies now that have introduced better paternity benefits for companies. So I think something needs to change with that. Actually, it's equal for the men and women to have time off with the children. So then there's not the gender gap moving forward when women come back into the workplace where they've had a long period of time. If we're actually sharing that out in our households, that will filter down into the employers rather.
Yeah, I completely agree, Kirsten. I think that it's not just maternity pay; it's also paternity leave. It's also flexible working for both men and women in terms of, like Mike said earlier, caring opportunities, childcare, etc. But I do think a lot of work has to be done by employers to improve this over the coming years if we are going to get to gender equality within 2030, because at the moment there's obviously a massive gap there. I also want to point out, I think that there's a lot of things that employers should be doing. So I think regular audits on pay should happen, which I don't think happen at the moment. And I also think that whole piece around employers giving the same opportunities to both men and women. And it was really interesting reading the part in the gender white paper around this, and also the webinar with Kate the other week.
Thank you. Great. So I know, Matt, recently you published a blog about male allies and mentoring. So could you just kind of give us a little bit more information about how you think that can help women in the workplace?
Yeah. So I think, firstly, mentoring, if it's done right, can be fantastic for anyone, male or female. It can give you a really good third-person perspective outside of line management, where you're perhaps more likely to speak a bit more freely. But it is really important you choose the right mentor to be successful. I think mentoring for women, in terms of what we're talking about today, could be really powerful. I think having a female mentor who's been successful despite some of the biases that exist could help other women overcome some of the challenges that they may face in their career. In terms of what men can do to act as allies to women in this space, I think there's a few things. I think firstly, when you witness instances of gender bias, call it out, take action to address it. This isn't just an issue for women to overcome. This should be men helping and supporting women and overcoming some of these challenges and speaking up when they see examples of it. I think supporting initiatives that push for more diversity and inclusion in your workplace, educating yourself, so learn, like some of the things that we've talked about, learning about the ways that the gender bias can manifest itself and how it can impact on women's careers. And then touching on what was referenced earlier around the language that you use. It hadn't really occurred to me before, but I think the more you think about it in any industry and in sport, you hear about kind of male-dominated language. So in our world, maybe key man dependencies. I've always played cricket, and cricket has become more of a gender-neutral sport. But batsmen have always been called batsmen since the game ever started. But more recently, it's changed to batter. So again, it's some of those things that might seem quite subtle and isn't going to resolve the issue on its own, but it's part of a kind of wider thing that people need to think about.
Okay, thanks for that. So kind of moving on from that bit, so what can we do outside of the workplace and to encourage gender neutrality and make sure that we're being diverse?
For me, it kind of I think it starts at home, and ensuring bad traits aren't passed on to others, really. And it goes around that education piece to children. But I think also, again, looking at ourselves in the mirror as well, we need to take accountability. If we see it happening not in the workplace, outside the workplace, or any means of life, that actually we should be probably calling this out. And if we don't, does that make us just as bad for not doing so? And just kind of building on Matt's point there as well. So you've got obviously the T's in golf. I've noticed many courses now, they're not referring to them as the ladies' T's. They are just based on your skills and ability now, which I think is certainly a move in the right direction. And we need to certainly see more of that taking place and actually normalise the normal.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Has anybody else got anything else that they want to add?
Yeah, I think education is key. For my generation, there was a real emphasis on redefining what was acceptable professions for both men and women to have. Obviously, with you going into schools as part of the gender paper, it's been seen that there's still a lot of work to do in removing those stereotypes completely. And to be honest, we're it's an ambitious target to say we'll have complete equality by 2030. It's gonna be an evolution, and we're gonna need to keep reinforcing it in schools, and it's gonna sit with the next generation to change that culture.
Yeah, I think it's what we said earlier, isn't it? Starting at home before they even go to school, isn't it? You know, changing our behaviour and then moving on to education and calling things out when we see or hear things it doesn't quite sit right with you.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else, anybody?
I think there's just an expansion on that education piece that Mike mentioned in terms of, I think there's a real responsibility for everyone of all ages, both men and women, to take it upon themselves to educate themselves on this. I think that it's gonna. If that doesn't happen now, we're going to be nowhere near that gender equality by 2030, as Mike said.
Yeah, and I think just touching on the education piece, I think one thing, you know, just a small example, but to me quite powerful of what we did quite recently was when we discussed the menopause in a team meeting.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a real eye opener, but gave me a really good understanding of how it can affect women, their mental health, their personal life, and their careers. And those discussions just on their own, even though it was a short discussion, you know, will help me both professionally and personally. And I think the other thing, probably just to touch on, is thinking about you know, what are the wider benefits of having better gender diversity. This isn't just about making it a better experience for women. Actually, there's much wider benefits than that. And for businesses, you know, what's the incentive for them to drive some of these initiatives? So having a diverse workforce, we know, can lead to better decision making and problem solving. It can lead to a wider range of perspectives and ideas, which in turn will lead to more innovation. And studies have shown that companies with more gender diversity in leadership positions tend to have a better financial performance.
It's a really good point around having a diverse workforce, and that's going to start with more women taking up careers in financial services. And that's only going to happen through education. I think it was really eye-opening in the gender paper that more than half of the girls that were interviewed didn't know enough about financial services to actually pursue a career. So we're really going to have to make an effort and this is where we can help as with our knowledge of going into schools and kind of providing information around financial knowledge, such as pensions, investments, savings, just different life skills that are really going to benefit.
And I think just leading on from that, Mike, is looking at the here and now as well. There's clearly not enough female in senior leadership roles on boards, and I think that needs to have a significant shift, particularly in wealth as well. I know Kate and Carl, our directors, they're very keen to have a split workforce, which we've got here at Simplify as well. Obviously, the directors, it's a male and female from the top down as well. So they're absolutely leading by example. But we need to see that wider spread to really see this change, and that will hopefully trickle down. And if you're new into the industry, and you've got a female leader that you're looking up to, and you are a female yourself, it's going to set you on the right career path and almost make anything achievable for you as well.
I completely agree, Chris, and I think that that's going to be a major shift in current circumstances. I read recently off the back of reading the Simplified Gender White Paper around the amount of women compared to men in senior positions. This isn't just in wealth, this is in other positions, such as I read in, for example, the UK has the smallest number of women judges in the whole of the world, which I thought was quite a fact in itself.
Yeah, and I think it just shows that it's not just our industry, is it? There's the wider industries, there's stuff to be done at home, there's stuff to be done in education, and there's stuff to be done, there's things to be done in all the industries. Well, thank you very much for your time today. It was great to talk with you. If you haven't already seen our white paper, if you haven't already seen our blogs and podcasts that we've done on this subject, they can all be found on our website. So thanks very much to you, and thanks very much for listening.